Name of person David, owner of our channel and storyteller. Ella, the female protagonist of the story. David, Ella's husband. Mrs. Eve, Ella's neighbor. Mr. Tony, banana garden owner. Mrs. Rose, Ella's mother. Spiritualist Emma, a famous medium in the area. Location, our channel. YouTube channel, dedicated to ghost stories. Google, online search engine. San Francisco, the beach city where Ella meets David. Google, there seems to be some confusion here. Google is not a location. Cat Hamlet, the hamlet where Mr. Tony lives. Spiritualist Emma's mansion, where Spiritualist Emma practices. Other details. YouTube, online video sharing platform, ngi.net. Website, providing detective, horror, romance, and social psychology stories. 500 million VND, the amount of money that Ella and her husband saved. 3 years, the time that the grandmother and her grandchild lived in the banana garden. 30 years old, Spiritualist Emma's age. 4 realms, a form of Vietnamese folk belief. Sacred cat, an animal believed to be outside the 3 realms. Sure, here are a few ghost story-themed script title suggestions, with the goal of grabbing headlines and attracting viewers. Title focuses on horror and creepy elements. The horror of the new house. The ghost of vengeance, crying at midnight. The ghostly child, Calamity from the wild garden. The curse of the cat demon, the horrifying secret behind the well. Creepy full moon night, ghost of a little girl appears. Title evokes curiosity and mystery, the horrifying truth behind cat's meows. Mystery in the banana garden, mysterious deaths. The solution to terrifying dreams. Who is behind all this? Journey to find peace for family. The title emphasizes spiritual and causal elements. Karma from the past, the price to pay for sins. The injustice of abortion, the dead fetus takes revenge. The law of cause and effect, you reap what you sow. Late repentance, last chance to atone. The power of motherly love, overcoming all disasters. Our channel, episode 128, Hiding the Body of My Grandchildren, a huge horror ghost story. McDavid, full 4K, YouTube, https www.youtube.com. Watch. VEEGYPSXDY. Transcript. Welcome to our channel, a gathering place for horror, spiritual, ghost stories. If this is your first time visiting, hello, I am David, the owner of this place. Nice to see you again on our YouTube channel at the usual time. Today's story will tell about the misfortune of a young couple when buying a house. What will happen? Will they escape the disaster? Please follow along right away. Ella is 27 years old this year, a beautiful girl, smart and sociable, so she is very popular with everyone around her. After finishing 3 years of high school, Ella passed the entrance exam to a foreign language school specializing in Chinese. After graduating, Ella applied to be a tour guide for a fairly large company. Because of the nature of the job, Ella had to move around constantly with the group. At first it was okay, but later, her family saw that Ella was a girl and that this job was not stable in the long term, and she did not have time to take care of her husband and children, so they advised Ella to change to another job. Of course, Ella understood that. It has been 5 years since she graduated. Ella has only buried herself in work, not even having time to take care of anyone. At Ella's age, most of her friends are married, have husbands and children, but Ella is still single. On a trip leading a group to San Francisco, Ella met David, a fellow countryman. Fate brought them together, and they fell in love and got married. 2 years after getting married, Ella became pregnant. The couple was both happy and worried, because at that time, Ella was still working at a travel company, and now she was pregnant and could not travel much. In the end, Ella had to quit her job at the company. The couple decided to return to their hometown to find a job in business. When living in the city, the couple rented a house, and after several years of hard work, they saved a total of 500 million VND. David and Ella borrowed more money from both sides of their family to buy a small house in the countryside to settle down. Luckily, they found a house with a very good price, a large area, and located on the main road, David, which was beneficial for the couple's future business. Behind the house was a very large banana garden. No one knew who owned it, so the air was cool and airy. Ella's parents in the countryside have several hectares of land dedicated to growing vegetables for sale. Thanks to that, David got into the business of collecting vegetables and selling them to small traders at the wholesale market. Every morning at 1 or 2 a.m., David would drive to the farms and collect all the vegetables, then drive more than 30 kilometers to the wholesale market to sell to other traders. Ella opened a small grocery store at home to sell. Everything went smoothly and peacefully until Ella was 5 months pregnant, when strange things started to happen in the house. Every time David left, Ella would hear a cat meowing somewhere behind the house. At first, Ella didn't pay any attention, thinking it was probably just a stray cat, but then, every night it happened, the meowing sound echoed and lasted for a long time, sounding very mournful. Sometimes Ella even imagined that the meowing sound was like the cry of a child crying for its mother, especially on full moon nights. The cat meowed even louder. Sometimes it even stood right outside Ella's bedroom window and cried miserably. Then Ella was haunted by the sound of cats meowing. Every time she heard it, she was scared. At times like that, Ella could only try to cover her ears tightly so as not to hear those torture-like sounds. Several times she couldn't stand it anymore, so she angrily went straight to the back garden to look around to see if there was a cat there, but there wasn't any. One day, the neighbor Mrs. Eve came to Ella's house to buy a bottle of fish sauce, so Ella stopped by and asked, "Hey, Aunt Tam, have you heard anyone's cat meowing all night long?" Mrs. Eve's house was only about 10 meters away from Ella's house. Ella thought that since the cat's meowing was so loud, it must have been heard from her house. But Mrs. Eve looked surprised and asked, "What cat? I haven't heard anything for the past few days. Maybe the stray cats saw that there were a lot of mice in the banana garden, so they crawled in there." When Mrs. Eve mentioned the banana field behind the house, Ella was curious again, because it had been almost half a year since she moved here and no one had come to take care of or harvest the bananas. The weeds were growing wildly. The ripe bananas had fallen all over the garden and the mice had come in and eaten them all. According to Mrs. Eve, that banana field belonged to Mr. Tony's house in Cat Hamlet, about 5 kilometers away from here. Mr. Tony's family suffered from an incurable disease and passed away early. He alone struggled to raise 3 children. The 2 sons were grown up and were working in the city, while the youngest daughter had just passed away just over 3 months ago. In the past few months, he had been mentally depressed. He was either bedridden or sitting absent-mindedly as if he had lost his soul. He did not do any work and stayed at home all day, so the banana garden had been abandoned until now. Ella heard Mrs. Eve's story and felt even more sorry for Mr. Tudang's family. He was so pitiful that he had to raise his children alone, and when he was old, he still had to endure the situation of one with white hair seeing off the other with green hair. She felt so sorry that she asked for Mr. Tu's address, first to visit and offer condolences, and then to ask for his permission to clear the land and remove some of the dying banana trees, because if they were too dense, insects would swarm and affect the surrounding environment. Ella's house. The next day, David and Ella went to Mr. Tony's house as planned. As soon as they entered the house, the couple vaguely felt a heavy atmosphere of mourning. On the bamboo bed on the porch, a skinny man sat there, absent-minded, as if he had lost his soul. He just sat there motionless, his eyes looking into the distance, his mouth muttering, something that was hard to hear by himself. Every now and then, he would show his yellow teeth and laugh foolishly. David saw that and immediately knew that the person in front of him might have a mental problem, so he advised his wife to go home, but Ella refused. Anyway, since he was here, let's try talking to him to see if he would react. Seeing that there was an altar of a young girl in the house, she was probably Mr. Chu's youngest daughter who had just died. Ella boldly went in, placed some fruit offerings on the altar, and lit incense. The man was originally naive, but as soon as seeing two strangers approaching his daughter's altar, he jumped up, pulled Ella's hand away, and cursed. "Who are you? Are you trying to harm my daughter?" David quickly hugged his wife, pulled her behind him to shield her, and explained, "No, no, no, we're just burning incense for her." Hearing that, Mr. Tony calmed down and asked softly, "So, who are you two? Where are you from? And where are you here?" Only then did Ella have the opportunity to talk to Mr. Tu, after which Ella asked Mr. Chu's permission for her and her husband to clear a corner of the banana garden. As soon as she heard about the banana garden, Mr. Chu's face immediately changed. His face was full of fear. He was grumpy. The general idea was that he would not allow Ella and her husband to touch his banana field. David felt that something was wrong, so he left with Ella, feeling uncomfortable with that crazy old man. In the following days, Ella still heard the loud meowing of cats every night. Gradually she got used to it and did not pay attention to it anymore. But the story did not stop there. A month later, the corpses of small animals began to appear in Ella's house, such as dead snakes, birds, and rats in front of the house. The frequency became more and more dense. At that time at first, it happened every 3 or 4 days, then almost every day. One day, Ella was bending over to sweep the trash in the back, when suddenly, out of nowhere, the corpse of a large cat fell right in front of her, scaring Ella to death. The scary thing was that the cat's corpse looked like it had been gnawed by something, and its neck was torn to the point of being almost severed. Ella only had time to scream once before fainting on the spot. Luckily, some neighbors nearby heard Ella's screams and ran over, and Ella was helped into the house and given a cold treatment. Just woke up. After that day, David was very angry. He was sure in his mind that the banana field behind the house was too dense. Wild cats, dogs, and all kinds of things would crawl in there to live. If it continued like this, sooner or later, something would happen. Not to mention that when Ella gave birth, the child would need a quiet, cool, clean place. Thinking and doing, David came home very early the next day, then packed his things and prepared to go to the back of the banana field to cut grass. Knowing that his wife was meticulous and didn't want him to touch other people's banana fields, David deliberately said that he would only cut a few bushes of grass in the only within our land, not encroaching on Mr. Tony's land. Ella heard that and didn't say anything more. Everyone did their own work. David was in the back weeding, while Ella was in the front selling. David held the machete and started cutting the grass. At first, he only cut on his own land. When his wife wasn't paying attention, David slowly cut all the way to the banana garden. If he didn't go in, that's fine. But when he didn't go in, David was terrified. What kind of grass was growing so wildly that it was taller than half a banana tree, and the vines were so tangled that he couldn't find a space to squeeze his feet in? After a long time of digging, David had only been able to clean a small area. The more he did, the more scared he became. When the grass was cleared, the ground was full of animal bones lying everywhere. Some places were even piled up in a large pile, covered in bugs, looking extremely disgusting. David thought to himself, his house has been in such a dirty place for so long, and now he just found out. If he had a child and let him live in this polluted air, he would be sick all the time. Thinking so, David became even more frantic in cleaning. The deeper he went into the ground, the more animal corpses there were. In addition, there were an old well. The mouth of the well was about 1 meter and was covered with a thick concrete slab. David guessed that Mr. Tony used this well to water the plants, so he didn't mention anything. One thing that made David feel a bit strange was that on the side of the well, he saw a lot of incense sticks. Judging by the color, It was probably burned recently. While he was looking, suddenly there was a rustling sound. David reflexively turned to look in the direction of the sound. David felt that something seemed to be moving deep in the banana field. The sound of leaves and grass kept coming. The rustling continued. David was curious as to what it was, so he started to push aside the grass along the dense banana trees and headed towards the direction of the sound. After walking for a while, David still didn't see anything unusual. The only thing that worried him was the strong stench that was spreading in the air. After walking a little further, David suddenly stopped, because in front of him was an open space that wasn't as dense as the surrounding area. There were quite large animal footprints on the ground, traces as if something four-legged was living here. So, looking at the banana trees around, there were claw marks everywhere. David knew for sure that this was the lair of some animal. Looking at the carcasses of animals like chickens and ducks lying around, leaving only white bones, it was very likely that this was a carnivorous animal. Ella said she heard wild cats meowing, so it was likely that this was their lair. He decided to hunt them down. You're right. I apologize for missing those timestamps. Here's the full edited text, removing all the time details. Later, if I have children, these cats will keep meowing loudly in the middle of the night. How can the child sleep? While David was looking around, Ella's voice called out from upstairs. David, what are you doing? Why are you touching other people's land? Mr. 2 said it was forbidden. David quickly turned back and saw that Ella was looking unhappy, so he smiled, pointed at the piles of bones on the ground, and explained to Ella. After David finished speaking, Ella didn't blame her husband much because the incident had already happened. Moreover, what David said made sense. Thinking about the baby in her belly, Ella tacitly agreed. Besides, seeing the suddenly empty space behind the house made Ella feel much more airy than before. After that, David went to the market to buy some traps, intending to catch some wild animals. David waited until Ella was fast asleep, then quietly went out to the banana garden alone to set the traps. In the morning, he had secretly memorized all the paths and trap locations, so it was easy to find suitable trap locations. When he was done, David chose a hidden corner to sit down and wait for his prey to fall into the trap. David used a young hen as bait. Sooner or later, a stray dog or cat would fall into the trap. But for some reason, David did not see any dogs or cats coming. Feeling frustrated, David was about to go back into the house when suddenly a rustling sound rang out. David immediately fell silent, not moving, trying not to make any noise. From afar, two dim, mysterious spots of light gradually appeared. David squinted his eyes to see what it was, but saw that the two spots of light kept appearing and disappearing, making it impossible to capture them. David held his breath and waited for his prey to come closer. That animal seemed to be very smart. It had already smelled the chicken in its territory, but it did not rush forward, instead choosing to circle around to investigate and then meow a few times. Hearing this, David guessed that the thing in front of him was a cat. Those two spots of light were probably its eyes. If it was a cat, David would want to catch it even more because he knew that cats were inherently negative creatures, not good for children. After a while, after the cat had carefully examined its surroundings, it slowly approached the trap. Thanks to that, David had the opportunity to see its shape clearly. The cat's entire body was jet black, blacker than the night sky. The moon was bright that night. Its fur seemed to reflect the moonlight, revealing its entire body clearly. The cat's body was abnormally large, its long pointed arms, its long tail constantly wagging back and forth. Its two eyes were a bright jade green like the full moon. As the cat got closer, David vaguely felt an unusual coldness enveloping the surrounding space, causing David to unconsciously get goosebumps. At that moment, David suddenly felt an invisible fear in his heart. He waited attentively to see the cat fall into the trap, but contrary to David's expectations, the cat seemed to have a premonition when it stopped just a few steps away from the trap, continuously making creepy sounds. The night sky suddenly blew up, not knowing if the wind distorted its cries or not. But David imagined the cry of a newborn baby. Next was a rustling sound, like someone was walking on dry banana leaves, the footsteps getting closer and closer. The cat heard the footsteps and stopped, not intending to go towards the trap anymore, but resolutely turned around and ran towards the direction of the sound. Immediately after that, the crying of the child also disappeared, replaced by giggling sounds like a child was happy to see its mother. David felt strange, not understanding why there were children's voices in the banana garden. Was there a house nearby that had just given birth that he didn't know about? When David moved here, he went for a walk around to ask around and get to know the neighbors. This area had a lot of land, but few people, mostly old people. Their children had all gone to the city to work. There was no house with a new baby. After waiting for a while, but still seeing no movement, David guessed that the cat had left, so he regretfully returned, thinking that he would continue to set traps the next day. Since the day David cleared the grass near the house, the cat's meowing had stopped, maybe because it was too empty and open. The stray cats were afraid and didn't dare to stay there anymore. She thought that this way Ella would be able to sleep soundly without being disturbed, but that was not the case. For some reason, every time David left the house, Ella couldn't sleep. She felt like someone was staring at her in her own house. One day, while Ella was sleeping, she suddenly heard crying. The sound was not very loud, but echoed from far to near. Ella opened her eyes and tried to listen, but the crying stopped. But as soon as Ella lay down and closed her eyes, she would continue to hear it. Ella tried to pay attention several times. Each time it was the same. Ella found it strange, but in the middle of the night, her husband was not home and she was pregnant, so she did not dare to go out to see who was crying. She could not close her eyes to sleep, so Ella had to stay up all night. The next day, David came home from work and saw that his wife looked tired. David asked her with concern, but Ella was afraid that her husband would worry, so she did not tell David, just mumbled to get it over with. Sometimes it was a normal cry. Someone was probably sad. But things were not as simple as Ella thought. The next day, the crying rang out again, but this time it was very strange. The crying was shrill, both like a child crying and a cat meowing. The crying grew closer and closer until Ella could feel someone standing right outside her window, crying. It was only now that Ella could clearly hear what the sound was. It was not just a baby's cry, but also the meowing of a cat. The two sounds intertwined together, sounding like the cat was trying to calm the baby down. Sure enough, here's the script with spelling and grammar corrected. Script. Realizing that, Ella's goosebumps suddenly rose. The sound of the baby crying was still in her ears, becoming more and more miserable. Ella was about to become a mother, so she suddenly felt a pang of heartache in her heart. Ella boldly sat up, her eyes fixed on the still-closed window. In her mind, Ella planned to open the window to see if there was a child outside, but Ella discovered that the window seemed to be stuck, and she couldn't open it no matter how hard she pushed. Ella risked going around to the back to see what was blocking the door. In the dark, without a single ray of light, Ella kept walking. Ella kept walking and walking. Strangely, from her room to the outside of the window was only a few dozen meters. She didn't understand why she kept walking, but never reached the window. The window was quite large, just over a meter above the ground. But right now, Ella felt like the wall of her house was endless. She had been walking for a while now, but still couldn't see the window. Ella had no idea that she was actually falling into a ghostly illusion. At this time in reality, it was already morning. At noon, David came home and saw that the gate was still locked, so he thought that his wife was probably not home. Maybe she went to her grandmother's house to play, because the two houses were only a kilometer apart. David took the key to open the door and went inside. When he entered the bedroom, David saw that the blanket was still intact as usual. Ella always folded the blanket neatly when she woke up, It was never this messy. It was a bit strange, but David didn't think much about it and made the bed. Instead of his wife, David saw that Ella's phone was still lying on the bed, not knowing where Ella had gone and left her phone at home. Somehow, David called his grandmother's house to ask. And of course, Ella wasn't there. Suddenly, David felt anxious and uncomfortable, so he went to the neighbor's house to see if Ella had gone to anyone's house to play. But everyone said they hadn't seen Ella since morning. People came to buy groceries, but Ella didn't open the door. David suddenly remembered the strange incident the night before. He frantically returned home and went to the banana garden to look for her. Finally, David found Ella lying unconscious right outside the bedroom window, a few dozen meters away from the banana garden. David was scared pale and quickly carried Ella into the house. Just as he was about to pick up the phone to call the emergency room, Ella suddenly woke up. Seeing that, David was as happy as if he had found gold. He rubbed oil on his wife's hands and feet, checked her over, and found no injuries. Then he felt relieved and asked, "Are you feeling better? Are you feeling tired? Why did you faint out there?" Ella was stunned when her husband said that. She remembered that she had not fainted. When she was looking for the window, she suddenly heard her husband's voice calling her. She turned her head and saw that she was already lying on the bed. Ella glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 3:00 p.m., which made her panic. It was clearly still night just now. Why is it now afternoon? The more Ella tried to remember, the more confused she became. Ella was stunned. David explained the situation to his wife. "Oh my God, I came home from work and couldn't find you. I looked everywhere and finally found you passed out right outside the window." Although Ella was confused, she still shook her head to indicate that she was fine. She just felt a little headache. That night, David was so worried about his wife that he didn't go pick vegetables. Fortunately, nothing strange happened that night. The next day, Ella was back to normal, and David was relieved to see that. Because of the nature of his job, he couldn't take a long break, so David only took a day off and then went back to work. When David was away from home again, Ella was once again disturbed by that strange sound. This time, Ella clearly heard the sound of a baby crying, but now it was replaced by a small voice like that of a 3-year-old child babbling. Suddenly, in her daze, Ella saw a little girl running past her door, then peeking at her with her small head. Before Uy could say anything, the little girl turned and ran away. At that moment, Ella's hair was disheveled, as if she had been summoned, and she quickly got up and followed her. The little girl ran for a while, then stopped, turned back to look at Ella, as if she was waiting for her to follow her. She happily skipped along, her mouth chattering and laughing non-stop. Ella didn't understand what she was saying, but her adorable appearance made Ella feel happy. So Ella followed the little girl straight to the back of the house. In that dark night, the whole space didn't have a single light to illuminate it. Ella saw the little girl walk to the front of a small house and stop, looking at Ella, waving, as if calling Ella to come towards her. Ella just walked into that house, unconsciously. When she entered the house, Ella saw a woman sitting there. She was wearing a jet black velvet dress. Ella even greeted and talked to them. After asking, I found out that they were a grandmother and grandchild who had lived here for nearly 3 years. Because they didn't have a house, they built a temporary wall of leaves in the banana garden and lived normally. They rarely went out, so not many people knew about their existence. For some reason, when Ella heard those words, she didn't suspect anything. She happily sat and chatted with them for a long time. Ella had no idea that she had once again fallen into an illusion. In reality, it was already morning, and of course, there was no house in the banana garden, nor were there 2 lonely grandmothers and grandchildren living there. When David returned, he discovered that his wife was missing once again, and he hurriedly searched for her. This time, he found Ella lying motionless next to the well behind the banana garden. Just like last time, after waking up, Ella had no memory of reality. David could no longer rest assured. He took Ella to the hospital for a checkup. The results showed that Ella had no health problems at all. Ella herself knew better than anyone that this was not normal, because she clearly remembered seeing and talking to those two strange grandmothers and grandchildren for a long time. But when she woke up, everything disappeared as if it had never existed. Although she was not afraid and was fine, the recent events made Ella both confused and worried. Only then did she tell David everything. When David heard the story, he was shocked and immediately called his mother-in-law. After all, he did not know much about these mysterious things. If the couple could not handle it, they would have to ask the adults. Mrs. Rose, Ella's mother, believed in spirituality. As soon as she heard the story, she immediately suspected ghosts. So that same day, Mrs. Rose took the couple to the temple of a famous shaman in the area. This shaman was very young, named Ha, only in her early 30s, but it was said that she had the four realms' destiny, serving the saints, so she was very talented. When they arrived, the place was packed with people, everyone waiting for their turn. After half a day of waiting, the three were finally called. When they entered the main hall, all three were overwhelmed by the huge and majestic shrine. Above were 6 bronze Buddha statues that looked extremely majestic. Below were 9 statues of saints with colorful dragon robes and crowns, incense smoke billowing, and fruit, tea, and wine. Seeing the guests enter, a disciple immediately lit incense and gave it to the 3 people to pay respect to the saints residing in the shrine first. Only after finishing could they speak to Aunt Ha. Spiritualist Emma pressed her fingers and said, "The land where the home owner is living has a spirit residing in it. Because the female owner is pregnant, her soul is sensitive and is easily possessed by a spirit. I looked at her reflection and saw that it was a child spirit, not a bad spirit. It was just a little bit of an obsession with lacking love, seeing the homeowner happy, so it wanted to share. But I cannot interfere with this matter. The child spirit is being protected by the sacred cat, and the sacred cat is something outside the 3 realms. Heaven and earth do not care. I am a holy medium. I cannot go beyond my duty. If I want to untie this knot, I must find the person who tied the knot. Only then can everything be resolved." After that conversation, the 3 of them were at a loss and could only return disappointed. Not knowing how to solve the problem for the time being, Mrs. Hoa told David to go to the market to buy some fruits and gold coins, then set up an altar to pray, hoping that the spirit would not haunt Ella anymore. But it seemed that this was only a temporary solution and could not completely resolve the matter. Ella kept thinking about Spiritualist Emma's words that she had to find the person who tied the knot. But who was that person? Ella began to piece everything together. After thinking for a while, Ella realized that from beginning to end, it was all related to Mr. Tony's banana garden. First, Ella heard a cat meowing in the banana garden. Then Ella saw the 2 of them also living in that banana garden. It was clear that this matter had something to do with Mr. Tony's family. It was clear that he knew something, so he forbade her and her husband from touching the banana field in the backyard. The next morning, Ella and David went to Mr. Tony's house again and told him everything they were experiencing. When Mr. Tony heard about it, he blamed the couple a lot. "Oh my God, I told you not to go into the banana garden, but you 2 didn't listen. Now things have turned out like this, and you've come here to question me." At first, Mr. Tony didn't say anything, but after a long time, the couple begged him so much that he finally gave in. Mr. Tu told them that everything started 3 years ago when his family was still living off that banana garden. Thanks to it, all 3 of his children were able to get a full education. But when his youngest daughter had just finished high school, something happened. She was seduced into love by a playboy, and when the little girl got pregnant, that guy denied all responsibility. When Mr. Tu heard about it, he was extremely angry and insisted on forcing his daughter to have an abortion, which was already more than 3 months old. It was that wrong decision that made everything so messy today. After forcing his daughter to have an abortion, Mr. Tu was afraid that the neighbors would know and lose face. So he took the fetus into the banana garden and buried it right next to the old well. He thought that everything was resolved, but it was not. Since then, a series of unfortunate disasters occurred one after another. First was the strange death of the man who had seduced Mr. 2's youngest daughter, who was also the biological father of the unfortunate child. It was said that he had hanged himself for unknown reasons. At that time, Mr. Tony was somewhat gloating, but until his youngest daughter started to go crazy, constantly laughing and talking to herself, and finally died suddenly on a full moon night. Mr. 2 discovered many cat footprints around his house, and there were also ragged claw marks all over the walls. After his daughter died, Mr. 2 also began to see strange things happening. Every night, a very large black cat appeared in the house. Its fur was jet black. Its appearance was exactly like the cat that David saw in the banana garden. Every night that cat came, every time it meowed, Mr. 2 heard the cry of a newborn baby. Mr. 2 had long suspected about spiritual things, but because his daughter's death had made him sink into the pain and torment for so long, he did not pay attention to it. Now that he saw David and Ella in trouble, he agreed to intervene. A few days later, Mr. 2 invited a teacher. Mr. 2 took the teacher to the banana garden, so David and Ella went to see. The teacher walked around the old well in the banana garden and also asked to go around to David and Ella's house. Finally, the master concluded, that child died young. If he had been buried properly and worshipped properly, he would have turned into a red baby spirit to bless the family. But because Mr. 2 buried him in a banana garden right next to the well, which is often the place where the yin and yang meet, he suffered hunger and cold and developed an obsession that he could not let go of. And that black cat is a cat demon. It was attracted to the cry of the fetus and came to this land. The cat demon is a female cat with maternal instincts, so when it saw the abandoned baby's soul, it took it in and took care of it. Because of the child's obsession and grudge, the cat demon took revenge for the death of Mr. 2's daughter and the child's father. More or less, it had a hand in it. Hearing the teacher, Mr. 2's eyes filled with tears. He never expected that his daughter would die unjustly because of his angry actions. Thinking back, the child was innocent. It was all Mr. 2's own karma. In the end, following the teacher's instructions, Mr. Tony dug up the fetus's body and buried it properly next to his youngest daughter's grave, then gave her a name. This child was a girl, everyone. The teacher brought the fetus's spirit to Mr. 2's house and set up an altar to offer incense and candles to the child every day. In addition, right at the old well, Mr. 2 also set up a shrine to worship the cat demon, because now that it was in this land, no one in heaven or earth could do anything to it. They could only wait for it to leave on its own. Perhaps, as spiritualist Emma said, Mr. 2 was the knot. Ever since he brought the spirit of the fetus back, Ella and David's family was no longer disturbed. Later, Ella gave birth to a child very smoothly. A few years later, Mr. 2 hired someone to cut down all the banana trees in the garden to leave an empty plot of land to sell to someone, and he went to the city to live with his son. After that, someone came to buy the land and built a house to live normally, and no one saw the appearance of the cat demon again. Until now, the couple still live on this land peacefully. Today's story ends here. Thank you all for accompanying and following this story with David. If you have any feelings and thoughts about today's story, please leave your comments below the video. Now, goodbye and see you again. Wishing you a good night's sleep.